Shalom, shalom, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Pulse of Israel here in our eternal ancestral homeland in the united capital of the Jewish people since King David's time, thousands of years ago, Jerusalem. Today, we are back to get a special political update from our political insider, Jeremy Sultan. Jeremy, for those who are not familiar, is the director of the Yamina Party English operations. He is a political consultant to Yamina leader and Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, and number 14 on the Yamina list. So, good person to hear what is going on. Let's bring in Jeremy. Shalom, shalom, Jeremy. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you doing, Avi?
Thank God, healthy, busy, and a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to you and hear what the fly on the wall is able to tell us about everything going on with Israeli politics today. So what's the good news, Jeremy? What's the good news you can give us?
Well, for me, I think the best news, and we've heard this over the last week, is, of course, all of the stuff that we're seeing right now in Judea and Samaria. We had announcements of over 3,000 units going through either the initial or the final process of approvals, including many areas that are on what people would call the wrong side of the fence. And of course, we just heard a couple days ago from Housing Minister Zev Elkin that we've taken an additional 1,300 units within Judea and Samaria and put them into the marketing process. It's great to go ahead and authorize new building, but there have been plenty of buildings that have been authorized but were never marketed to the public. So it's important to see a lot of things going on, over 1,000 in each category of initial process, final process, and then marketing so that people can go ahead and get those buildings actually populated with people instead of just standing there.
Yeah, listen, you know my position. I'm no fan, a big fan supporter of this government, but I do believe it is always appropriate to give thanks when thanks is due, and understanding the reality and the complex reality that here is a government that is approving over 1,000 new building projects, or whatever the terminology is, but in Judea and Samaria, where it's a government with anti-Zionist parties and representatives who are very much against building in Judea and Samaria and for destroying them. And here they're part of this government that's part of approving this. So do you think this is going to be bringing about any coalition problems? Because they've been very outspoken of being against this. Or this is just one of those frogs that one of the sides has to swallow in order to keep this government together moving forward?
Well, it's really both. We already heard yesterday in the Knesset, Moshe Raz from the Meretz Party got up and said on the podium, you know, Bennett's been talking about how this is a government that goes 10% to the right of the last government. He said this is actually 20% to the right of the previous government. And you know, of course, from his ideological position, he said the only reason that we are, you know, doing this, and the reason that we're justifying the fact that we're allowing all of this to happen is, again, and these are his words, not mine, that the alternative would be allowing the political, you know, descendants of the assassinated, you know, leader of the left, Yitzhak Rabin, to be in charge of the country, meaning they're willing to go ahead and allow all this stuff to happen, recognizing that, again, in policy, again, forget about who the players are and what their personal positions are. If you're looking at actually policy and what's happening on the ground, here you have one of the members of the Meretz Party saying very clearly, this is 20% to the right of what we saw in the previous government, but we're willing to swallow those frogs. We're still going to be very upset about it. We're going to tell everyone we're against it, but we're going to swallow it, because if we crash the government over these things, the alternative is going back to Netanyahu and Smotrich and probably seeing Ben Gvir as a minister in the next government, and that's something that they're just not willing to do.
Interesting. All right, so I'm glad you brought up Moshe Raz, because I want to come from a different angle tackling what he said. in some ways, even though I am 110% against his ideology and believe he is a danger to the Jewish people in the state of Israel, I respect him for saying what he believes and publicly saying that. Because that leads me to my disappointment. And my disappointment, and I'm going to bring up Prime Minister Naftali Bennett in this case, where you brought up the Moshe Raz mentioning that the future of Rabin's killers are in the Knesset and they would be in charge. Well, up until a few months ago, when the left used to talk like that, they were also referring to Naftali Bennett. And here we have Yair Lapid saying those same words, just an official part of his official speech was saying that. And we heard no pushback at all from Naftali Bennett, the prime minister, where those are really insightful words that just a few months ago were said also targeting you, me, Naftali Bennett, Ayelet Shaked, and everyone. And yeah. I would have expected, obviously, they're partners in this government. So, all right, that was your speech, Yair, but publicly saying, Yair, you said things that shouldn't be said. Not just shouldn't be said in this government, but not said at all.
I'm sure you've noticed, but the prime minister has made it a point not to publicly criticize the alternate prime minister, to sort of set a different tradition compared to what we saw in the previous government, where we saw constant bickering between Netanyahu and Gantz. The relationship between Bennett and Lapid is good. And when messages need to be sent privately, they're sent privately. In terms of Yamina, we were very, very vocal about this. Ayelet had a long Facebook post. She also interviewed. She went on TV to, express her outrage at Lapid's remarks. We saw also remarks by MKs in the party, Nir Orbach, Yom Tov Kalfon. So there was a response from the party, even if not from the prime minister. And it might seem as semantics, but I think that the proper way to go about things when people are looking towards the leaders of the state is to see a good relationship, publicly especially, between the two people who are going to be rotating the premiership in this term. And you can go ahead and, like I said, convey whatever it is that you want to say privately. Moshe Raz is a person, for instance, that I've known for a very long time. I'm thinking, over a decade. This is, I think, the third time with lots of breaks in between that he's been in the Knesset. I have deep ideological differences with him. You can check on YouTube some TV debates I've had with him. I don't believe he agrees to debate me on TV anymore, actually. Maybe I'm just too persuasive. We have a cordial relationship within the Knesset. But he's a guy who does not want to be, if you will, someone who keeps things different behind closed doors. For him, it's very important to him, if you will, the mirror of Itamar Ben-Gvir, whom Itamar Ben-Gvir is very vocal in public, and he's, for sure in private, he's saying the same stuff he's saying in public. So Moshe Raz is just, that kind of a guy. And when you are on the fringe, as definitely Moshe Raz is, you have that luxury, and you have the prerogative to go ahead and be able to go ahead and do that. When you're the prime minister, you're in a different position. And any public criticism that you show towards anybody on anything ends up becoming a very big story. And you have to be careful about that. Perhaps we got used to prime ministers in the past. Again, I'm not necessarily talking about the predecessor, but there are many examples, if we look at past prime ministers, they would enjoy getting into the headlines, having public spats with ministers within their government, or, firing ministers or deputy ministers, or making a very big, deal about such things. Sometimes you need the message to get across, and you can convey that sometimes through other people within the party, as opposed to doing it yourself as the leader.
I appreciate your answer, and I hear what you're saying. I guess my one comment would still be what Lapid said was total incitement, something that should never be uttered by someone who wants to be a leader of the state of Israel, especially when it is regarding his, just a few months ago, he was saying same incitement towards people who are now his partners, now alternate prime ministers. And I accept what you're saying. I guess in my eyes, I see this could have definitely been one of those exceptions. But I respect the answer that you give to explain the situation. So let's go on to a different.
No, I'll just say on last point, in case it wasn't clear, if you read the text of what the ministers, also Matan Kahan, I forgot that he also responded to Lapid, but really, I think across the board, if you look at just about every single minister, MK within our party was pretty clear on our positions there, and they used very, very strong language. There's no reason for me to repeat it, but again, it's the sentiments you feel, I think, were definitely conveyed by the party. I understand you wanted to see that from the Prime Minister himself, and I understand that you appreciate the answer, but that's just where we are on that.
Right. All right. Let's go on to another issue. Just recently, it was became headline news that a woman who is an assistant, you'll give the exact details, but an assistant to the Security and Foreign Policy Committee, which is one of the most, not only one of the most important committees, but one of the most secretive committees where security secrets are given over by the top security echelons in order to help politicians make the right decisions. That an assistant to that committee is someone who is somewhat associated with the Muslim Ram party, who has openly supported terrorism, terrorist suicide bombers, and killing Israel and destroying Israel, and yet she's an assistant to that secret committee. And headline news has it that when the head of the committee, someone of, I think he's Yesh Atid, Ram Ben Barak, at first he said no, it's not a problem. Then the blowback made him pull her back and say, let me look into this. And now he just put her back on the committee, saying everything's okay. What's the latest? Can you explain to us? Is this something we're supposed to be worried about? Is this really nothing to be worried about? Because in my it seems horrible, but love to hear your take on it.
Sure. What we're talking about here is a situation where you have an assistant to the chairman of the Defense and Foreign Affairs Committee in the Knesset, which, like you said, it's their job to be able to supervise both the defense and security, situation, as the parliament is supposed to do, as well as the foreign affairs and diplomacy of the country. It's one of the most important, some would say the most important, but I think it really depends what sector you're in. But it's definitely one of the most important Knesset posts that a person can have. The way that things work at the moment is you have every MK is allowed a staff of only 3 people. It's a little bit different than as a senator when you have 70 people and you have an office in state and in DC and whatever it is. Chair people of the committee get, besides the 3 assistants, they get a 4th extra slot. I can tell you already back from the first time that I got a permanent pass to the Knesset, and anyone who's an employee or anyone who's supposed to get security clearance, they need to go through a special process in which you have people who screen you and go through your history and ask questions and learn about your contacts and really form an opinion to be given to the speaker's office and also to the employer. In this case, it would be Ram Ben Barak, of course, sitting in this very important position, saying if this person has passed the clearance or has not passed the clearance. For whatever reason, again, we saw all the stuff that was, of course, published. She passed through the clearance. Again, apparently this stuff wasn't so hard to find on Google or whatever else, but she passed the clearance, the same clearance that I've passed before and many of my friends and everyone beforehand. And I understand that Ram Ben Barak's initial thing was to be like, look, the Knesset checked her out. They said she was okay. She passed the clearance. So he's going to back up his own employee and make a decision that he's going to trust the system in place, that it works. When additional things came out, he realized that there was obviously some sort of situation here that he was not aware of. He went ahead and he froze her position. At the time, he was overseas, and he pretty much denied her access to the office, to the Knesset, or to any materials. It turns out that within, again, the 4 positions that are available within his office, she's not in the specific position that she's in. Someone who gets to see the papers, the classified documents and stuff that are brought to the committee. Again, there are different levels of clearance, there are different levels of security. Anyone who's been in the Army is well aware of the system in place there. What ended up happening was he ended up saying, look, I'm going to completely keep her clear from all of these things as she has been before. I'm not aware exactly of what additional safeguards or whatever were put in place. But this entire situation is still, if you will, under investigation, not just on his level, but internally within the Knesset. They're looking at how it was that she was able to pass the security clearance without being able to give this additional information to her employer. And again, I want to say I have a lot of friends in Mishmar Knesset. I myself have gone through the process. I think these people are really professionals. These guys really do a good, thorough job. They ask questions that show that they do their homework. So I think that, this particular situation was an exception. It's not the rule. It's something, of course, I think should concern us. But I think the fact that Ben Barak was willing again to, first of all, go ahead and freeze everything and to investigate himself and see what's going on. And again, that's still ongoing, as well as on the Knesset side, to try to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again. To me, I feel that's the most important thing. I understand why that position would take this as a golden opportunity to go ahead and smash the coalition over this. But the security of Israel was not compromised. She did not have access to any documents. Therefore, she did not have an ability to, deliver those documents to anybody else. As to why it was that he specifically chose her, regardless of the process of going through security, right? The Knesset guards are not the ones that choose the parliamentary assistants for the Knesset members. They just screen them. You would have to ask Ben Barak why it was that he chose her specifically for that position. But like I said, she was chosen for his MK staff and not to deal specifically with the committee itself.
No, it's was she I read the news that she was reinstituted to the position, meaning even after he froze it, but he reinstituted. Is that correct?
He said, he froze it until he could do an investigation. Right now, again, I was in Knesset yesterday. I didn't see her around there. My understanding was that, again, she's been unfrozen, but she's not gone back to complete, regular conduct, which I think, again, part of that is also because of the own internal Knesset, investigation into this. But like I said, I was in Knesset yesterday. I didn't see her. Monday, as you know, is the main day in Knesset. So if you are someone who's an active Knesset assistant and you're not there on a Monday, I'm not sure exactly what that means, other than perhaps she's back on the payroll or not suspended anymore, or perhaps she's working from home. I don't know the exact arrangement that was done with Ben Barak, but she was not fired or anything like that, at least not at this time.
So I'll tell you what my deep concern is. Obviously, it's very concerning that that someone who has a history of supporting terror and terrorists against Israel passed the Knesset security clearance process. All right, but let's put that aside. Let's put that aside.
No, again, I want to just say one more thing on that point, because again, as someone who went through that process, right? You didn't. I'm assuming no one, the great majority, if not 99.9% of the people listening to us, did not go through it. It's a thorough process. It's rigorous. It's not a walk in the park. Again, I have friends,
which makes me even more concerned.
So that's what I'm saying. I really think this is an exception to the rule. And even with the best, even within the best institutions, the best bodies, mistakes happen. Again, I don't know. That's why you do an investigation to see what happened that was wrong. But, people have asked me, does this shake your confidence within the Mishmar Knesset, within, the various security services? It doesn't. I still have full confidence in them. I think, again, the fact that they're willing to admit this and do their own internal investigations. We don't need, the opposition to, draft a bill or a parliamentary inquiry, meaning they're going ahead and they're self-screening, they're doing their own tests and their own investigations, because they want to get down to the bottom of it to make sure that they can provide the best service to everybody.
Right.
And I think
what I was trying to say, that's the least of my concerns.
Right. Okay.
What the bigger concern is that here we have the head of a committee who he himself was assistant director to Israel's secret services.
Yes.
And he has willingly hired someone who in the past
Well, again, he didn't know about it, but yeah.
Okay, which he didn't know. Here's an assistant to
Again,
the security services.
You would think he would do his own screening. I understand that. But like I said, I have no idea how he went about, hiring his own employees. He would have to be able to speak to that. But I understand your point.
But still, again, like I would still have a concern, but I would have some understanding if the Muslim Ram Party hired her as one of their assistants. But here is someone who he himself was the assistant to, I think it was the Shabak, to Israel's top security operations in Israel, hiring someone who blatantly in the past supported terror and destroying Israel, and even now potentially still having her in a position working in his office for the committee, etc. That is much more concerning. I'm already concerned about the government. I'm put aside the concerns about the government, but to know that the people running this country and people who are supposedly patriots, who are concerned about Israel's security, to the level of Ram Ben Barak, that whether willfully ignorant or blind or not allowing facts to change his mind about someone who's a step away from getting, even if they don't physically have access, they're a step away from potentially getting access to the secret information and then just passing it on to the enemies. That it's like extremely concerning for the security of the state of Israel. Forget about this government or not. That's just on a more generic level. I don't know what else there is. What else there's to say to explain the situation, but it's extremely concerning.
I think I'll say that point again. I would not have hired her. I think regardless of this, situation, as someone who's a veteran in the Knesset, the level of professionalism from different assistants and what they bring to the table and whatever it is. I never saw anything special, particularly there. What bothers me in this case, and again, it's fine to go ahead and target the assistant, because that's where the story is. But there are people who are saying that, Ben Barak, despite being the deputy head of one of Israel's, secret service, organizations, is not qualified to be chairman of the Defense and Foreign Affairs Committee. It casts an entire shadow on all of his work, on all of the committee's work. All of the members there, again, whether it's coalition, opposition, or whatever it is. I have problems with these generalizations. I have a lot of problems with these linkage issues. When this is a certain, situation where it needs to be dealt with, it needs to be dealt with within the compartment in which it is. And to go ahead and, sort of blow this up and decide that this means a bunch of other things and to connect dots, where I just don't see, frankly, again, as someone who's there on the ground, right? As you point out many times, I'm the fly on the wall in the room with the big guys. Sometimes I see things and nobody pays attention to them. And other times I see things that are really much overblown. I think this is, again, an issue that was important to be raised. I think it was important for this story to be published. I'm very happy to see that there was action taken on all sides, but to go ahead and then say, this means A, B, and C, I'm not willing to go there. But I do agree, this was a very bad situation. This was a mistake. It needs to be dealt with. It's still ongoing. And frankly, if I was Ben Barak, like I said, I wouldn't have hired her. And after this, I certainly would have fired her. I wouldn't have gone through all the lengths that he has. But again, it's up to him to make decisions about his own staff, right? I can't go ahead and start intervening in terms of who he's hiring and who he's firing, especially if, for instance, at the end of the Knesset investigation, they make the determination for whatever reason. I don't know what's going to be there, that there's nothing wrong with her having a permanent pass and to be a Knesset employee, meaning, there's this idea of not being holier than the Pope. If the security establishment, goes out there and says she's okay, and that whatever was in the past was 10 years ago or 20 years ago or whatever it is, and she has no connection to any of that anymore, and there's a reason why it didn't come up within the clearance, thing, then again, that's something that could be applied to a lot of us, right? If you're looking at MKs on the right and stuff that they might have done, 10 years ago or 20 years ago, that they themselves condemn today or whatever else. But regardless of that situation, even if it was 10 or 20 years ago, I know like this: if I was an MK and I was hiring people and I sent people get clearance and I didn't get this information, I would be very, very upset that this was not stuff that was brought to my attention, because that should be, in my opinion, right? Whether it is illegal or, whatever it is, I want to know what it is that the people that I'm hiring and bring into what I consider at least the Kodesh HaKodashim of the Israeli democracy are 100%. That's something that I want to have. I know that you share that, feeling, and that's where your concern is. I think that's where a majority of the concern of the people who are raising this issue, where it's coming from. What I'm just saying on this is that the dots that people are trying to make beyond this specific, situation, to me, I just don't see them.
Oh no, I'm very glad you brought that up, because this brings up a much bigger issue, which we've spoken about in the past, and we're on the same page on. Of course, you can clarify. It doesn't have to do with this government, because the problem of Ran Ben Barak is an issue that we have been dealing with throughout Israel's governments, even under right-wing governments under Netanyahu, which is, and I'll say this, and you can clarify how you want to clarify, but many of those in the top echelon of Israel's security establishment have been extremely impacted by a progressive left civil agenda, which, regardless of how patriotic they are regarding Israel's security, diminish the real security threat from even Israel's Muslim community, who are Israeli citizens. And whether police, whether Shabak, whether IDF top echelon officers. And this is something that, again, it doesn't have to do with this government, but this case of Ran Ben Barak highlights, it basically has come out to the open in a way for more of the public to be able to have a window to seeing what is happening to some, if not many, of our top echelon security officers who, again, I'm putting out there, they could be extremely patriotic and thinking they're making the right decisions to protect Israel, but they have a misdiagnosis of part of the security concerns for Israel, especially when it comes to what I call, and you could disagree with me, but a fifth column we have as Israeli citizens. Not all. There are plenty of Israeli Muslim citizens who want to be full citizens and serve and get the benefits of being full, equal citizens of Israel. But yet there is a large population of the Israeli Muslim citizen population who want to destroy Israel. And many of our top echelon security officials whether ignore that, don't want to deal with that, or work otherwise. And this case just highlights that on a high level with this committee. And so please clarify.
Sure. I don't talk about my military service. I'm not going to talk about it now, but I had the privilege to work with a lot of people that went on to have a lot of sensitive roles. They became, alufim, major generals. Some of them were candidates for the top job of, the IDF chief of staff. It was very clear to me while serving with them what their political positions were. But you have certain people who go about things in a very, what we call mamlachti way, in a very much, statesman-like type, situation, strict professionalism. And I could really respect those people. There were some people, unfortunately, that already then I could tell, and again, it has nothing to do whether they have progressive agenda or not, but that was usually the common denominator, where they let politics interfere. At the time, I was, obviously one-on-one, not in front of the soldiers or whatever, but I would, convey my opinions. And it didn't, surprise me after they finished, whatever positions they did there, and they went on to become, in higher positions. And then from there went on to politics, that they went ahead and continued, what they tried to do, already in the military, to go ahead and do that on the political side where they could be more overt. I always say, I think this is very important that the professional, people, whatever position they're in, but especially if they're in the Army and the security services, need to maintain that professionalism and be apolitical. And there are a lot of people that are like that. I believe the great majority are. The problem is that you do have those few who aren't. And a lot of times they do end up in influential positions because you have people who at any given time are in charge of deciding who goes up the ranks, and they locate these people, or they know these people previously, and try to help them get along, and they help them up the ladder. And I think, again, that's unfortunate, and nothing that I'm saying here is news to anybody. The left has accused the right of doing that as well, of course. But what it comes down to is that you want to think, whenever you're looking at any state institution, but especially the Army or the police or, any of the, services down to the Israeli prison service, right down to the IPS, which of course has been in the news lately, that all these positions are being held, especially the top positions, by people who put politics aside and do their job for all Israeli citizens. When I'm looking at the people right now that are in a majority of the positions of influence where it is important, I think a majority of those people are definitely professional people, like I said, who are doing what it is that they're supposed to. And there are some people there that I can already guess which political party they're going to go to. Again, some of those people are also on the right. It's not just on the left. And that's just the reality of life. Look, it's not something that Israel is special for. We've seen this in the U.S. Okay, we've seen this in plenty of places also as well in Europe and within the free, just about every democracy where this type of thing happens. It would be better if it didn't. And obviously for us on the right side of the map, we're going to be a lot more upset when we see the left doing this, particularly when you see some people with radical progressive agendas getting to these places. And traditionally, you're going to have a situation where people are more conservative, are going to show more restraint in terms of trying to go ahead and move these agendas. That's just the reality of where, life and politics meet.
Right. No, I'll just clarify again, and then also to open up a greater understanding, even for our listeners who might be not necessarily attuned to what we're talking about, referring to. But I'm not even referring to them or Ron Ben Barak having a political agenda, because obviously him hiring her, he thinks that's the professional thing to do, right? Mm-hmm. And many of the people in top echelon of the security services, including the police, not just the Army or the Secret Services, when they're making their decisions, they're going according to the rules and according to the protocols of their institutions. But part of the protocols today, for instance, just to give examples from the city of Lod, mixed Israeli city of Jews and Muslims, when the Jews were being attacked by Muslims and they called the police and they said, we're being attacked by our Muslim Arab neighbors, the police didn't come. So then instead what they said is, oh, let's call the police and say we're being attacked by Jews. Guess what? The police showed up. So now that's not about those police men or women acting out of ideology. They're acting according to their protocols, according to the professional decision making and decision makers. That's all professional. But which includes in it the professional decision making is being done because it's already been influenced by a progressive agenda that is tying their hands behind their backs to act properly. And again, this isn't something against this government. This is something that exists for generations. And I was told about it against the Netanyahu government for not acting enough or making the changes enough in Israel's security to be able to properly defend Israelis, both Jews and Muslims, from a growing violence and and Hefker situation in the Negev and the Galil, etc., etc. So that just to clarify on that point.
No, it's fine. I'll respond to that on the Ben Barak and then do a segue into the load thing. I mean, let's call a spade a spade. People are saying, you know, Ben Barak wanted to hire an Arab. He wanted to be that guy who was, you know, the guy with the security background who hired an Arab while he was, you know, sitting in that specific, you know, position. Right. That's what people are saying. Again, whether it's true or not, I don't know. I could understand, you know, that picture, right? That's what he wanted to do. But it turns out that, again, he hired her for specifically a position in which she doesn't even have access to that committee. So you know, it's possible that even that was for optics and not actually for substance. You know, so if we're talking about, you know, again, progressive agenda going in, I don't know if this specific situation of that hiring was more for the optics of being a part of that movement or actually, you know, belonging to it with that particular case. Because a lot of times you have people who care about those type of things of how it looks, not in terms of allowing it to actually change the way they do their job. In terms of, you know, the load situation and the policing there, and I say this also as someone who, you know, in my previous term in municipal politics, I sat 5 years on the defense committee and sat with a number of police chiefs, and I'm very aware of the situation that the police have. They feel, you know, for the stuff that they need to do in order to do their job in a place like Lod, the laws need to be different. You know, from their perspective, the law does not give them enough power to be able to do what they need to do without ending up needing to face a court and a judge. That's their position. And they feel, you know, if we're going out, and we know that going out to respond to a call means that we're going to spend the next 6 months in court, it makes them think twice before going ahead and moving forward on this.
Right. Just to clarify against for the viewers, there is an official government report called the Orr Report, I think from 2002. What was the year?
It was after the 2000 riots. I don't remember if it was
2000,
01.
whatever the report, right? So the
I think
police,
it was 01, the report.
Right, the police were called out to defend against Israeli Muslim Arab citizens rioting in the streets, stoning Jews, driving on the roads, right? Innocent Israeli Jews and Arabs were injured, seriously injured by massive riots. The police responded forcefully, stopped the riots, and then this government report basically blamed the police and, I'll use my words, neutered the ability of the police by changing its protocols to properly act as police and enforce the law against future rioting violence by specifically the Arab Israeli Muslim population. And since then, they've basically been neutered and the violence has grown. So, right. And that basically gives into what I was saying. Again, it's not about a politician's specific agenda. It's the fact that that agenda has influenced protocol, actual defense, security.
So again, I think it's because of those things.
Right.
And this is what happens. You sit down and you ask the police, well, how can we change the law, right? And again, if you're a professional person, you come and you say, let's do A, B, and C, and we'll be able to do our job. You have other people who say, let's do A, B, and C, and then it'll, address one agenda one way or another. I think a great situation is looking at one of the bills that we passed yesterday in a first reading that there's been a lot of public debate about in terms of going ahead and changing the wording in one of the laws in terms of where the police can act without a warrant, right? In many cases, you have a situation where the police will see, even a person with a gun retreat into his house. Now you have to go to a judge. You have to say, look, I saw this guy. He has a gun. He went into his house. Please give me a warrant so I can go in and do a search and get the gun out of there. And you would think it would be very easy and straight up, and he'd be able to go ahead and get that warrant and be able to go in and arrest him. But unfortunately, it's not as straight up as you might think it should be, okay? So again, the police said, we want to be able to do our job. This is stuff that we need. Give us tools. So we went ahead and we drafted a piece of legislation as a temporary order that would allow us to give the police, more of an ability to go in and do their jobs. And they had people who went ahead from the other side. You had Tamar Zandberg, number 2 in Meretz, former party leaders, saying, you're taking away civil liberties. You had people also in the opposition, from Smotrich's party.
Personally, I'm afraid about that as well. I'm questioning whether that's the right change. Because again, for people who don't understand, the way you're framing it, that it was done for this purpose, to allow the police better tools to enforce and be able to go into homes and take out illegal guns. All of a sudden, people are worried. Wait a second, but this then allows the police to go into any home, and regardless of gun or no gun, and without a warrant. And that's the scary.
It doesn't allow you to go in for any reason. Again, the legislation itself, I think, is very clear. All you're doing is, you're changing the wording from something that is, a plausible cause, to something that's more of a plausible, probable. You're playing around here with wording, of severe laniach to. The situation here of changing the wording still means there needs to be a suspicion that you can actually put on paper that you can still prove in front of, the court. Meaning, if in the example I gave before, I saw the guy had a gun. So yeah, of course, any policeman can just pretend, okay, I thought the guy had a gun and whatever. And, we're aware of the stuff that are going on in the States.
Right.
But he can't be like, oh, I like that house. I'm going to just decide maybe they have a gun and then go in. Meaning, if he says, I think he had a gun, and then he goes into the house and he doesn't find a gun, and the person sues him, sues the policeman's in trouble. The idea here is to give the policeman a tool when he knows a crime has been committed, but because of paperwork, he's not able to go ahead and actually, stop the crime from continuing to be committed, or to, end the process in terms of the crime, or bring the person that he needs to justice. It's to give the person what he needs in terms of the premise to be able to go ahead and move forward. I'm fairly certain, Avi, that if a policeman barged into your house and they searched, they wouldn't find anything. And then you would, probably take them to court and make a lot of money. So I think, again, this isn't a situation where it's giving free rein to the police. It's giving the police an ability in situations where they know, specifically in that place there's a lot of guns, that they can now go in and take the guns. And then when they're in the court doesn't throw it out because they entered without a warrant. The court says, okay, there was a temporary order, which, by the way, originally wanted to do for 3 years, after speaking to, various people also within the coalition and a few members of the opposition who are willing off the record to come and speak with us so that Netanyahu wouldn't scold them because they couldn't do it on the record. So we've lowered it from 3 years to 18 months. We'll go into the committee. It could be we'll make more checks and balances. This isn't a final version to the law. Maybe from 18 months, it'll be reduced even, to a shorter period of time. But the police are coming and they're saying, we want to be able to do our job. And you have 2 ways to go about this. Like I said, you can either give them what they're looking for, which is more tools, again, to balance it out with all the other values and have checks on that. I think a time limit, an expiration date is a great way to go ahead and do that. Or you can do the other thing, and the other thing is to, again, allow these norms, as you've pointed out, to take root and just allow the current situation to continue. And to me, it's weird because you would think that there is that there would not be an interest, right, with left, parties here. And again, look at the fact that the one opposing this is Tamar Zandberg from Meretz. They don't want us to be able to go ahead and go in and do these things because it harms that progressive agenda of, as you pointed out, you used your own language, but putting limits in terms of what the police can do. Generally, the right wants to allow the police to do their job, and it's the left that wants to cancel the police or neuter the police or whatever it is here. So either you want to resolve the situation in Lod by allowing the Wild West situation to continue, where everyone does whatever they want, and on all sides you have guns. Some are legal, some are probably illegal. Definitely on the Arab side, I would say the great majority of that is illegal. I'm not sure how many legal, ones you have there. But you're in a situation where either you go ahead and you accept the situation the way it is, or you try to resolve it. And if you're going to try to go ahead and resolve it with the police, you have to be able to give them the tools to go ahead and do that. And to me, at least, when I'm looking at the various democratic values that you're trying to deal with here, the ability to give them things that already exist within the law, meaning not create new loopholes for them to use, but to already use the existing law and the existing loopholes, but change the language around so that in those specific cases where the law already allows them not to use a warrant, to give them more freedom so they feel they have the tools to be able to go in and do what they want to do. I think that's the right balance in order to resolve the situation. The easiest thing is just to allow the status quo to continue. I think in many ways,
I think we both agree the status quo can't continue. I mean, we've been talking about this for years. I think, and this is a very important conversation because obviously, I think me and many others would be extremely supportive of the police and the security services having the tools and the necessary powers to properly go after and collect the hundreds of thousands of illegal weapons that are specifically within the Arab, Muslim, Bedouin population across Israel. 100%. The question is obviously, what are those correct tools and where are the boundaries? I think my concern with this specific rule, and I know I'm not alone, is, well, can it be done in a more specific way that it's specifically for going after illegal guns? Because again, we're living in a time where I think it's easy, where a lot of people all over the world, I'm not even referring just to Israel, seeing a vast overreach of abuse, specifically by police all over the world. I mean, just today I saw a video by a friend of mine in Australia where an Australian woman was outside about to take a run right outside her home, and police tackled her to the ground and arrested her and fined her. And you have 10 police officers surrounded this woman who's out to have a run with her husband, and total police abuse. And that's just Australia. We're seeing, again, in this whole, it happens to be in this whole public health COVID situation, the police have been allowed to run abusing innocent citizens. So there's this fear. There's a natural fear of many people seeing, okay, we want to support our security services and police to do what's necessary to go after the bad guys, but it's very easy, and we're seeing it today in a massive amount of situations.
Again, I feel the question here is there is the proposed, solution. If there's an alternative, suggest an alternative or accept the status quo. Right now, at least from the police, we did not get another alternative proposal. This was the proposal.
Well, I'm no lawyer, but I put out an alternative that it's specifically for guns.
So if you look
and not for other reasons, or the best way to define that it's specifically for potential illegal elements and not normative.
Some people say it's a very racist law. If you read the piece of legislation, in the Divrei Hesber, we make it very clear this is only for Arabs. And we talk specifically about guns.
Oh, really? That it's written that way?
In the Divrei Hesber, not in the law itself, because technically we're not allowed to do that by law, but you're allowed to do it in the Divrei Hesber. In the Divrei Hesber, we wrote it's only for Arabs, and we also wrote that it's specifically for illegal guns.
But that's written in the Divrei Hesber. But again, forgive me for being the cynic in me. A police officer can say, "Well, this is the law. I don't care about the Divrei Hesber. This is the law. I can do it according to the law."
But what I'm saying is then you go in front of the judge, and the judge does look at the Divrei Hesber. And I'm saying that there's a reason why you have Divrei Hesber. The Divrei Hesber is to explain to the judge, why did we do this?
Interesting.
What were we trying to do? Now, you're right. The policeman will go straight up and be like, this is law, I'm doing the law. That's the policeman's job. The policeman, he gets the book of the laws of Israel. He does not read the Divrei Hesber. But considering, again, this is something that's coming from initiative of the police, right? Meaning they're asking for this. One would think they know what the parameters are because they're the ones who helped us, formulate them. And again, if there is abuse of this particular power, so you have two things here. One is that it comes to the court of law. And any lawyer that would, deal with the defendant will be like, this is a little bit embarrassing to say, but my client's Jewish, and read the Divrei Hasber, judge. I think you need to throw this out. Like, this case isn't going to work. Look at the Divrei Hasber that was used. That's a big way of why they used the constitutional revolution of Barak in terms of elevating the 1992, the two basic laws, and doing the whole thing there. So I wouldn't go ahead and say the Divrei Hasber is not worth anything. In the court of law, it is. In terms of the policeman, it isn't. But I'm saying specifically in this case, because the policeman is asking for it, I think it's a little bit different. And I think the second thing also is to remember it's a temporary thing, meaning it's going to expire. This is being done so that we can, and this isn't the only thing. There are other tools that we are using, I should say, also outside of the police, in order to go ahead and target the three big crime families, which are really mob bosses within the Israeli Arab community within the country. If you want, we're declaring war on the mob here. This is one of the main tools, I would say, that we can use in order to go ahead and do it. If we know there's a storehouse where there's literally hundreds of illegal weapons, this will allow us to go in and take them. Something that we're not able to do right now, according to the existing laws. So again, if you have an alternative proposal, that's great. So far, we've not heard one. If you want to go with the status quo, I know that you don't particularly. That's also okay. But it passed last night in the first reading with the changes that we had come to in certain understandings. It'll hit the committee. I suggest the opposition does show up for those, discussions, and they bring whatever concerns they want. Because again, we have a purpose here. The exact mechanics and making sure that we maintain the checks and balances, that depends on the people who get in the room and decide that they're going to be a part of the process. If there are people who don't want to be part of the process, so we come to the determination of the law without them. My biggest piece of criticism, and last night already we saw that, the opposition is now showing that they do have readiness to send members of the opposition to certain committees, is that we still have permanent committees in Knesset. And again, the Knesset's already been in session now for, 6 months, 8 months? The government's been here for 4 months. We had the first mandate, the second mandate. We had time before that. Most of the Knesset committees have been formed. Ones that have been formed, in many cases, the opposition has boycotted all discussions. And we've just been passing legislation without the opposition having a voice. I feel it's undemocratic. In America, you vote out senators or members of the House of Representatives that don't show up to vote. But here it seems that, there's this term of ochlei chinam, right? They're getting their salary whether they show up to vote or not. But I think more crucially, when you have the entire opposition refusing to show up for discussions on important pieces of legislation, it's very rich to get up in the plenum when the vote is already on a final draft of the bill before it's made law and have your criticism. If you want to change things, show up to the committee, argue things there, do the real parliamentary work. I know it's hard now because each side has their own echo chamber, but the way that it used to be, and again, I'm saying this as a Knesset veteran, is that the opposition and the coalition, and it didn't matter who was right, who was left, you would have arguments in the committee. And if you were able to make a very persuasive point, or you're able to say, listen, I'm going to let this go through if you give me A, B, and C, and I'm not going to filibuster you. I'm not going to file objections to the bill. Usually we're able to find some common ground. And I'm hopeful, at least after we pass this budget, because I think things will change after we pass the state budget, that we'll be able to go back to normal Knesset work. Because I can definitely tell you, at least from the first number of months of this government, this is, in my opinion, right, a very dysfunctional Knesset. And I think it's a disservice to people who voted for the parties of the opposition, that their voice is not being represented on this specific issue that, for instance, you care much about, but as well as a bunch of other issues as well.
Listen, again, this is an extremely important topic, and obviously I want the police to succeed, and if this change in law helps make that happen, then wonderful. I'm just extremely doubtful of that. Like you asked, what would I want to be done? Well, what would I want? And again, I'm not coming at this against this government. My position is I've been talking about this for years, even under a Netanyahu government. And ultimately, in order for the police to have the tools and the protocols in place to do what is necessary against the growing violence in all different areas, violence, protection rackets, illegal guns, etc. Well, ultimately, the Orr report has to be thrown into the garbage. All the conclusions of the Orr report have to be overturned. And
I don't think one of the things I always say is you have to be able to work within the political framework that you have.
No, I know, 100%.
So I'm saying not just my government, not just my government, but I'm saying I know you're saying Netanyahu.
No,
too.
but I was about to say even under Netanyahu they didn't do that.
I know. Yeah,
right,
look,
even under Netanyahu they never did that. Kal v'chomer, even more so not under this government.
The justice ministers under Netanyahu, a lot of them included Tzipi Livni, Avi Nissenkorn, Benny Gantz. These are not people as justice ministers who are going to allow you to throw out the Orr report, or allow you to adopt the Levy report, or even move forward on the Nissim parameters, on conversion, or all these type of things. I think it's it's a problem, and I think legal reform is something we need to do. I'm a very big fan, as you know, of passing basic law legislation to go ahead and put a, if you will, final say on the limits of what judicial review happened to be on the legislative branch, since that was never put in law. And also to determine, what happens within the balance of basic law of the judiciary, basic law of the Knesset, basic law of the government. You need a separate basic law that decides between the three branches of government when it comes to legislation, what the rules are. And by the way, this is something also that President Reuven Rivlin, the former president, and many other people who are, let's say, they're not as, they're not Betzalel Smotrich, but they're also not, Merav Michaeli, in terms of the political spectrum, who agree with me on this, that we need to decide. I would even say, and obviously I think the two of us share a lot of the same beliefs on where that line should be drawn in terms of judicial review. But I'm saying, even if I don't get everything I want, just having a final resolution to deciding once and for all where the line goes, I think there's a lot of value in that. I think the fact that this is just, we have a lot of issues that are just up in the air. I go back, I think, in the faction meeting that we had yesterday in Yamina, where one of the aspects of the faction meeting, we brought in the Israeli Congress, which is a project of Professor Lipschitz from Bar-Ilan University, of being able to create agreements between different sectors within society. And he was pointing out that because the Knesset is not able to come to a consensus or legislate on the most hot button issues, what happens is you have issues being sent to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decides because the Knesset and the government did not. We didn't write in law that we're prohibiting the Supreme Court from weighing in stuff that we didn't weigh in on.
But that's not even true. The Knesset many times did decide, and then the Supreme Court throws it out.
That's for sure. No, but I'm talking about other situations. A good example is the loopholes in Chok HaChametz when it comes to hospitals. Okay, who petitions the Supreme Court? Not people in the mainstream. Adala.
Politicians.
Also politicians. But I'm saying these NGOs that are run by very extreme people.
Right.
Adala. Come on, these guys aren't even Jewish. Okay, why are they petitioning the Supreme Court about eating chametz in hospitals?
And Passover, right?
So, and then on the other side, so then, who do they sue? So they sue the Rabbanut HaRashit, right? So you have, the Haredim going against the Arabs on Chametz in the Supreme Court. And again, you have a law when it comes to Chok HaChametz, but you'll have loopholes, and they'll find the loopholes. instead of the Knesset or the government going in and deciding what to do with the loopholes. And a lot of times also the Supreme Court will say, legislate within 6 months. If you don't, we're going to decide, and they reconvene 6 months later. Surprise, surprise, the Knesset didn't make a decision there. And then the Supreme Court makes a decision that becomes, if you will, the norm or the de facto law moving forward. And then even afterwards, when we try to legislating against a Supreme Court decision becomes very complicated. If we do basic law legislation, we decide the Supreme Court can't do that, or that the loophole is they can only do that if we didn't, legislate after 5 years or 10 years or whatever formula it is that we do, agree upon. I'm saying that the situation where the Supreme Court takes whatever power vacuums it sees and applies it to itself is a problem. And I'm saying even in cases like that, even if I lose what I would like to see in terms of final resolution, we need to come to some sort of understanding where the separation of the branch of powers lie, where the checks and balances are. The judiciary is not going to like, my proposal or your proposal or anyone, pretty much on the conservative side. But I do think we need to resolve this because it's just it becomes a very, very, very difficult situation where,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, listen, but I'm on the same page as you, understanding that the ultimate changes that need to be made for the benefit of Israeli security, external and internal, can't be made because we don't have the political constellation of politicians able to take on the powers to make the changes necessary to the judicial system and apparatus in order to make those changes. It's just so It's all about what the art of possibility in an impossible situation where we can't do what is actually necessary. Right. So we're totally on the same board.
That's where we get to the proposal of the law that we talked about in terms of
100%. 100%.
And it's either that or the status quo. And again, I tell people I'm happy to hear alternatives, but it needs to be something that works within the constellation. Right. You said it yourself. You recognize the strengths.
Again, part of my problem and the baggage, you might call it, that I come with. And again, you were on the same page with me about this as well. We go back to the protests against the Gush Katif Gaza expulsion back in 2005, and we have the head of police telling his police officers, take off your name tags. So now basically they could beat up the protesters, which was an ideological decision, and then get away with it, not have to be punished. So, I mean, we all know the famous axiom, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So the question is, how much more power do we give the police that could potentially be abused, whether in general or for ideological reasons?
You're saying on one side, the Orr Commission, neutered them, but then on the other side, don't give them back their power. You have to find a balance. I
agree. I agree. And I'm saying it's an important conversation.
I just want to say something because it goes back to a previous point we made, in terms of, the police commissioner at the time there. That's a classic situation of someone who's, again, sitting in a state institution, of a security force, who makes a political decision. To me, that's a political decision, meaning, it was very clear the police commissioner supported the disengagement, the Girush, the expulsion, however you want to call it. And he realized that if he used the authority that he had, that he possessed, to tell policemen to take off their name tags, that they would be allowed to go ahead and do things without, facing the repercussions of that. And it would make it easier to move forward with the political agenda which he supported. I have a problem with that because, of course, the disengagement was the democratic decision, whether I like it or not, and obviously I don't. This isn't the point to name the names of the people who are still in Knesset today, and I always have a running list of all the members who voted for the disengagement who are still in the Knesset, and I always remember their names and remind them when I have an opportunity to do so. But they were able to get a majority, whether it was kosher or not, how they were able to do that. Sharon got a majority. He passed that. That was the law. And it's fine that the police sent, the police commissioner sent the policemen to do their job to enforce the law. But the thing is, there are checks and balances in the law. One of them is to have name tags so that if you are attacked by someone wrongfully, you are able to go ahead and there is, due process, and you can know the name of, your potential attacker and do something with it. And deciding to again, in that case, which I feel is definitely plain politics. Those are the type of things that bothered me. I told you I saw that during my regular service. I've seen that during my reserve service. And I've seen, unfortunately, what could be, I wouldn't call it the revolving door, but the transition that certain people make there, from the military to politics, in which I don't really see much of a transition. They're still saying a lot of the same things and doing the same things. It's just now they're doing it in a different position. And by the way, we see that also in other things. We talk about the judicial system. There's the famous Talia Sassone report, when she was a judge. And then after she turned the age of 70 and had to resign because that's Israeli law, she joined the Meretz party and ran in the Meretz primary. It's a problem. It's a problem to see these positions that are apolitical being used as political institutions in order to enforce political agendas. I think it's a problem.
Listen, there's so many more things to talk about. I especially wanted to talk about Ram and the deals being made above the table, as is so clear to all of us. But I guess we'll have to leave that for another time. Jeremy, it is always a pleasure talking to you. And again, I give you all the blessings, all the blessings. May God bless you to make as big as an impact as possible in this crazy, crazy reality of a government. I guess overall, what's one of the biggest disappointments is what I see, and I believe what you see also, as what's called a Bidi Eved situation, right? Now, not the ideal situation, but at least publicly, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett gives across the image that this is the ideal situation of bringing Israeli society together, forward, etc., etc. Again, optics, not optics. Still, it makes someone like me who used to.
I mean, I'll explain that point because I think it's important, because I think, again, a lot of times the stuff he says gets, twisted in another way. And again, I remember when we were all sitting in the room and we voted and we made the crucial decision, to go forward with this government. The prime minister was very clear in that, conversation. He's like, from my eyes, what we're doing right now is we're saving the state of Israel. We're saving the state of Israel from a 5th election, a 6th election, a 7th election. And it looks like, God forbid, a civil war, because historically, when democratically, you get to a point where you can't resolve the situation and get to, what we call in Hebrew, a hachra'ah, right? A resolution of the situation of who should have the hands of power, that usually does lead to a civil war. And when I go ahead and I look at the hatred and divide and stuff that I'm seeing now, I don't even know if it's as bad as it was in the days. I think it's better, frankly, than it was in the days when we were debating between going to a 5th election or accepting Lapid's offer for the rotation and to be prime minister for the first 2 years and change. So I think when he's talking about, the ideal situation here, it's we saved Israel from a very, very bad place of repeated elections, possibly worse than that. And this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity when you do have such a broad coalition, which really does. It includes all of the segments of Israeli society, whether it's the right, the left, the Arabs, the Jews, immigrants, and of course, Tsabarim, people who were born here, religious, secular. You have all of these, places where you're able to go ahead and do things. There are always going to be people who don't like it. The Haredim are going to say, okay, there's religious, but there's no Haredim. The Joint List is going to say, okay, there's Arabs, but, Mansour Abbas is the minority of, Arabs and is represented only by 4 seats in Knesset, barely past the threshold. He doesn't speak for us. He shouldn't be the person to be there. The Haredim will say, the national religious public and the people, supporting Naftali Bennett are nothing in, numbers compared to the Haredi community. Or you'll have people on the right in Likud saying, we're bigger than Gidon Sa'ar and his party. How dare he consider himself, that he's the right, we're the right, and we're bigger. And you're always going to have these type of arguments. But what it comes down to is it's a true national unity government. Because like I said, for the first time, you have all of these people together from all the segments of Israeli society within the same government. And you're able to get a lot of stuff done because of that. And I think he's encouraged by that. And he really likes it. And, I feel, right, like every day we're able to do another thing. And most of the stuff is just stuff that's boring. When it comes to stuff of, lowering the cost of living, it's not political, so it doesn't hit the news. There was a thing that came out there about how we were able to lower, the national deficit by over 1%. That's an amazing thing to be doing in the middle of a corona economy. I don't think people really, realize how difficult, that type of stuff is. There are a lot of very big positive things that we're doing. Unfortunately, the focus is always going to be on, the buzzwords, what's considered sexy, the friction, what this person said, what that person said. There's a lot of good stuff being done. And I think also it's important in terms of, recognizing for each base what they're doing. When Netanyahu overlapped with Biden, there were zero. There were zero approvals in the initial stage. In the final stage, there was zero sent to marketing. And here you have a situation where together we're looking at close to 4,500 between the various approval and marketing being moved forward by this government. And look, Moshe Raz gets up and he pours his heart out, and he's really upset. To me, I sit there and it makes me feel good. It makes me feel that, despite what a lot of the people in the opposition, might want to say, in the press, it seems that, our own coalition, partners realize that a very, very, very big part of the agenda is being driven by the right within this government. And, I love to see Mansour Abbas put up his hand and vote for these type of things. That's if you will, some poetic justice. If you look at the past things that he's said and done in his career, for him to have to now, vote for a budget that's going to give all of these, all of these millions to all of these different things that he cannot agree with.
Listen, when it comes down to it, I do not envy you. You are in a rough position. Again, being in this government, which is not ideal, making the most of it and defending it, which I totally respect. And I respect your explanations and insight as well, 100%. Because again, when it comes down to it, as I mentioned before, we're dealing with fundamental issues that have to change, that are so hard to change, and even under a right-wing government, and even more so under a not right-wing government. So, but the challenges are real. I'll tell you where my optimism is. My optimism is, and it's coming from, I'm a hafuch halafuch type of guy when it comes to this. Meaning hafuch halafuch, that's like the opposite of the opposite, like 180 degrees. I'm like explaining for viewers who don't understand the Hebrew. But again, and my blessing goes and for you to make as many good things as possible in this government. But believe it or not, from my perspective, the cases of Ran Ben Barak, the cases of the Muslim Brotherhood being in the government, little by little are waking more and more Israelis up to true issues in Israel that until now have not gotten the heads necessary, have not gotten the attention necessary, and attention from our own politicians even. But politicians are only able to act after they believe they have public support to act. So when issues are just below the surface and the public is not familiar with them, well, there's no public support for a politician to take a risk and do something. So, but it's in this government with all the good that hopefully you'll be trying to do, but there is plenty of very troubling stuff as well. But it is raising the troubling issues more to the limelight to hopefully be taken care of in a future constellation where we have the ability to make the necessary fundamental changes, even more so to help in the future. But again, with that, Jeremy, I so appreciate being able to talk to you and have a respectable conversation about these issues. And again, I give you all the blessing in the world to do as much good as possible in the position that you and your party are in.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk with you, Avi, and of course, your listeners and viewers. And I always enjoy to read the comments afterwards. Maybe one day I'll find some positive ones.
Jeremy, God bless you. God bless your family, health, sanity, and keep up all the good work you're able to do.
Amen. Thank you, brother.
All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that deep dive once again with our Knesset insider, Jeremy Sultan. If you did, please share this video. Really important issues. These aren't like short video clips of sound bites. No, these are real fundamental issues that we're dealing with as Israeli society in very challenging times, with a challenging government, with Jeremy on the inside trying to make as much positive as he can do within his party. But again, challenging times, real issues. And you take the time to watch, understand, and appreciate some of the greater challenges we're dealing with. Things are gray, folks. Things are gray. Signing off from the eternal ancestral homeland of the Jewish people here in our undivided capital, Jerusalem. This is Avi Yibla for the Pulse of Israel. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Pulse of Israel, frontline videos from the Holy Land. Support our work by donating today.